Good morning, everybody. I am fixing to go plant some squash. We finally got some rain in the forecast, and so we're going to go plant about 8 acres of no-till hard squash. The principle this planter works off of is it's going to plant as many seeds as there are holes. So this is a 36 hole seed corn drum. And so that means in each of these rows there's 36 holes around this drum. And you saw I taped up, I left in each row around the drum, I left 2 holes opposite of each other. So I got 1 hole open here and 1 hole open here in 2 rows, which would be this one and this one. And then on the opposite rows, these 2 rows, I've got 1 open here and 1 open here. So essentially in every row of holes I have 2 open holes. So in this drum, instead of having 36 holes in a row, I got 2. Alright, now I go over here and I've already found it, 71,710 on 30-inch rows with a 36 hole seed drum. Alright, so I take that 71,000, divide it by 36, because that's how many holes there are, and that gives me, it was roughly 2,000. It was 1,990 something. Multiply it by 2 because I got 2 holes. 4,000. That's the population that I'm looking for on squash. So normally when we're planting hard squash, we would plant the rows 5 foot apart, and we put the seeds about 2 foot 20 inches apart, 18 inches. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put the rows 30 inches apart, because that's what my planter is, and instead of planting 20 inches apart, we're going to plant 40, and they'll be staggered. So this will seed, then 20 inches this will seed, then 20 inches this will seed, and the same thing for the other side. So I've just got to get my gear set, run some test runs, make sure it's dropping properly, and we'll be ready to go over here to this wheat field that is burned down. Should be about dead by now, and we'll be ready to plant. The only problem that I've really ever run into, well, there's a couple problems that I've run into with planting into green standing cover or standing cover crop with this planter. There's 2 issues. One is sometimes, this is kind of rare, but sometimes the ryegrass, if it's really tall or whatever, if you get stuff kind of semi laid down where it's not standing pretty and tall, it'll get caught by these spike closers and it'll start wadding up, and you'll look behind you and you'll be dragging a row, and it'll get just a wad of cover crop around these spike closers. That's aggravating if that starts happening, but that's kind of rare. But what does happen all the time is the way the gear is positioned on this particular planter, it wants to grab cover crop in this sprocket right here, and you have to keep a close eye on it because it'll have cover crop wadded up this big around this sprocket. And the same thing with this one here, Malachi just cleaned out. On this wheel, it'll have cover crop wadded up so big the chain won't even be running on the sprocket no more. So you have to keep an eye on them. But other than that, this old planter does a pretty decent job in standing cover. I don't think I've ever had this planter geared quite this high, because we've never done it quite this way before. But that drum's gonna be singing. spacing is on time. We are about 6.5 foot apart, and every other row is in the middle, but we're dropping a lot more seeds than what I had in mind. 2 or 3 is alright, but I've got some places that it's doing this stuff, and that's not good. I need to do some math and figure out exactly how much seed cost per acre is going to be if I can afford this. For the most part, it's doing pretty good though. 2, 3. So we're going to try one more thing here that I've forgotten about. These Cyclos have a brush right here, and it's got a little hook, and I always run it with the brush pulled down, because if you run it with the brush up on soybeans, it makes the spacing erratic, causes a lot of skips, and I don't like that. But you have to run the brush up on corn or you'll have a lot of doubles, and I forgot about that. So we're going to put this brush up and try planting these squash with the brush up, and that may be the cat's meow. We're getting way too many skips and misses with the brush down. I don't really know why, but it seems to be these 2 rows that run on this side are all right. It knocks all the seed off the back rows. I don't know what's going on with it. I think if I could get this drum modified, this thing would work pretty good, but for now, I've got enough seed. I bought enough seed for 15 acres. We're only going to plant 8. So if I can average planting 2 seeds, then we'll be all right on the acreage. So I think we're just going to roll with it. I've got to get this done. I've still got 25 acres of soybeans to plant, but I've got to get these squash in, get them growing. We're about a month late getting them planted, which hard squash is usually a fall thing, but I still want to get it going because people come to us because we always have them early when nobody else does. It is dry as a snuff box out here, as my grandpa used to say. But the planter is going in the ground, so I mean that's a good thing. I wouldn't dream of planting a soybean right now, because the reason for that is if you plant soybeans in this extra dry soil like this, there's just in the soybean will find just enough moisture to swell up, and it'll start to put out a root, and then it don't have enough moisture to actually emerge, and it'll die. And it may not all do that, but you're gonna get a poor stand, potentially get a very poor stand if you plant when it's this dry soybeans. But this squash, I'm hoping is gonna be all right. Let's see, we're Thursday. We're like 5 days away from 2 or 3 days of rain, what they're saying. I'm gonna monitor it more closely, and if it gets closer to time and it looks like they're right, it's gonna be wide open on soybeans if the planter will go in the ground. I got 25 acres of soybeans that I really would love to get planted before that rain, because if it does rain for 3 days, there won't be no planting going on for a little bit after that. But I don't know, it's putting them in the ground. There's a big creek right here. This is a new farm we just rented this year. There's a pretty good sized creek right here that I can pull out of. It'll take a bunch of darn sets. What I mean by sets is set the sprinkler up, run it, move it, set it up, run it, move it, to even cover this spaghetti field. I've got this field, I've got this particular field I'm in is 8 acres, and I've got it broken up into 2.5 acres of spaghetti, a little over 2 acres of butternut, 1.5 acres of acorn squash, and just a tick over an acre of this new squash we're growing for a buyer that we've been working with for a couple years now, called red curry. It's a type of Hubbard squash, and I'm not familiar with it, but anyway, that's the layout for this field. And I'm just kind of walking and looking, making sure we're not depositing any seeds on top of the ground. I really want them 1.5 inch minimum for as dry as it is right now. So I'm gonna do a little bit of digging and make sure that the seeds are here. Right here is one that did not get buried. Must have been a hard, yep, it's a hard spot in the field. The openers have been doing better than that, but I can tell by where I'm standing and the way everything else looks around where I'm at. This is a really hard patch of ground I'm standing on here. But so far, that's the only seed I've found laying on top of the ground. These big old pink squash seeds are pretty easy to see even for somebody blind like me. But this is, even if it costs me a little extra in seed for it not singulating them, this is going to save me so much money over having people ride on here or any of the other ways you could plant them. I'd like to have a monoecium, 4-row, 5-row, 6-row monoecium to plant with, because I could plant everything and it would do a really good job of singulating. But I've got old Red here and she's paid for. Now the layout that you want to do here, the way that I like to do it is I plant 5 passes with this 4-row planter. So that gives me roughly 50 foot, a 50-foot block, and then I'm gonna leave about a 10 or a 12-foot driveway. And the way I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna turn around and I'm gonna come back up through here, dangling my row marker on my last row, and then when I turn around at the other end and come back, I'll dangle that row marker in the tire track of the tractor, and that gives me enough room after the squash start running that I can drive down through here. My air blast sprayer will spray 25-30 foot of good coverage, so that allows me to come down. I have to circle each block, which is a little bit inconvenient. I wish it sprayed both ways, but it don't. But I can come down and circle each block and get good air blast sprayer coverage for fungicides, because in our neck of the woods, for growing cucurbits, whatever they are, cucumbers, squash, hard squash, watermelons, pumpkins, you have to use fungicides, and you have to use them religiously or you will not have a crop. We're just too hot and humid. Up in the mountains, I hear tell they get by without it. I don't really see how, but for us, we have to use fungicides and use them religiously, or we're wasting our time. So that's how I plant it. I break it up into blocks, and that also allows us for like spaghetti squash, well, butternut, all of them really. Butternut will probably get picked the most number of times as long as we're getting rainfall, but even this spaghetti we'll pick it probably 3 times. So you don't want to destroy your field. You want to leave driveways where you can get back through the field with a tractor and a trailer to get bins of squash out. So that's why I break it up in blocks like this. Well, I've planted about an acre, 2 blocks out of this 2.5 acre section of this field, and I am going to quit. I'm just not happy with the way the openers. I'm using every ounce of downforce that I've got. I cannot get the openers to cut any deeper. I feel like if I'm not getting it in good enough, I'm getting the crop off to a bad start, and if this don't turn out good, it'd be disappointing to have to replant 2 blocks. It'd be really disappointing to have to plant 8 acres. So maybe that rain will come, and maybe it'll come sporadically, and I can get over here after a little shower and get it planted. It really won't take that long to plant this 8 acres with this 4-row planter, but I got to get the seed in the ground better than this, and I don't feel good about putting the seed in the ground. For the biggest thing, I'm not worried about these squash seeds cracking open like a bean wheel and then dying. What I am worried about with these squash seeds is mice eating them, and that may sound trivial, but we have seen it firsthand in black plastic, where we've gone out and planted 3-4 acre field of squash in black plastic, and the weather turned off dry like this, or we laid the plastic in the early spring. The beds were just as dry as a bone. They hadn't had any water run on them. We went out and planted them, and before we could, it was just dry. There was no rain, and it takes a long time to saturate a completely dry bed. And we planted the squash, and we have seen, mice eat 25% of the seed out there, because you can go back and find the little pieces around the holes on the black plastic where the mice chewed them, and that's in a bare plastic mulch field. So the mice population is higher out here in this wheat field than it is in a field with black plastic and dirt. So that worries me a little bit. Once the squash plants get up, they're safe from the mice, but while they're laying there in the dirt waiting on moisture, that concerns me. But anyway, y'all see how we do this, how it works now, and it is possible to plant squash and pumpkins without having a whole bunch of fancy equipment. These Cyclo planters like this are not really in demand. Nobody's using them much anymore, so you can pick one up pretty reasonable. Not a bad way to go. They still do a pretty good job as far as singulating and putting seed in the ground, cutting through sod, that sort of thing. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned. We still got a lot to do. But if you're enjoying the content, hit that like button. Consider subscribing. I'd appreciate it. Comment, ask questions. Try to get back to all the comments. Sometimes I have some fall through the cracks that I don't get to, but for the most part I try to answer all the questions. Y'all take care.